Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and you're following the 3H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about the huge state of Texas. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, grab your cowboy boots, pull up a stump, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I live in Huntsville, Texas, and I'm constantly hearing and seeing weird stuff. And I keep having weird stuff happen to me on this property. I live alone in this really old, creaky house. It's on a street called Bowden Road. It's in the middle of nowhere, pretty much. And to set the mood even more, I'm right down the street from a cemetery. It's a house that my aunt and uncle own. Now at the time, I was super poor, basically broke, so they said that I could live in it. Since it's in the ass end of nowhere, everyone else that I encounter is a hick or a hunter that owns property in the area. By the time of all this, I had lived there for about a year, and since I moved there, creepy stuff happens all the time. I mean, I get it. I live in a really old house, so of course there's going to be noises, but just listen to this. So I had just moved into the house. The place was creepy, and my electricity wasn't turned on yet. Awesome. I don't even have my dogs with me yet. They're still with my friend while I get everything settled in. And I think, well, I can at least last the night. I don't have all my furniture yet, so I'm on the living room couch. I fall asleep. I wake up like a million times in the middle of the night. The screen door keeps creaking. It's really freaky, especially when there's no power on. And every time, I keep saying, whatever, and I go back to sleep. But this time, I can't. I stay up listening to coyotes and the wind make the back door creak. And then suddenly I realize, why is my screen door creaking? The heavy wooden door is closed in front of it. My heart goes into my throat. I grab my rifle and run to the front of the house. And I notice that there's something huge on my porch. After sitting there for a few seconds, I gather my courage and I yell out, "Hey!" and something big runs down the stairs of my porch. I have an 80-pound dog, and this sounded way bigger and way heavier. That may not sound very scary, but you have no idea how terrifying that was for me. But the creepiest is yet to come. The next week after this, I have my 2 dogs with me now. Both of them are Dobermans. I feel a lot safer, even though my dogs are wuss bags. But I know that they're good sound alarm systems, and they'll wake me up if something's going on. I've been moving furniture all day. I was tired and sweaty. I wanted to take a shower. But the problem is, at this house, at this point, the shower was outside. It was basically just a shed with a concrete floor and a shower head. It's next to my actual shed, and next to that is a large roofed area that has a large bar, table, workshop area. I start taking a shower. It's warm outside, so it's not that bad. But the dogs start barking, and I think, I don't know if they quite understand not to run into the street yet. People fly down the road I live on. So, I quick as I can throw on my clothes and get out of the shower. I yell for my dogs a few times, and then I realize that they're already across the street. I yell for them to come back, but they aren't responding. They're at the neighbor across the street's fence, and they won't come back. I've never seen that neighbor's house because he has so much land, but he does have cattle. So walking across the street, I'm yelling at the dogs to come back, to stop barking. I walk over this little hill. There's a cow on the ground with its neck cut open, like a huge wound, bleeding everywhere, and it's still alive. I think, what the actual F? My dogs are barking at something past the cow, but I don't know what. Even though it's broad daylight, I can't see anything. I WTF for a long while, and then I just grab my dogs, bring them back across the street and inside. I don't know how to tell the neighbor. Walking to his house would take forever, but later on, I go up the street to put a note in his mailbox to tell him what happened to his cow. I go to check on the cow. It's gone. Just gone. And the weirdest thing about it, the blood wasn't just in a puddle. It seemed to be in a pile with some other stuff. That's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I can't help but wondering just what did that, but I also don't really want to see it. So about 7 years ago, I was living in Central Texas. It was late summer, early fall. My boss let us off early for the Labor Day weekend. I decided to avoid going home for a bit and just go hiking on the trails close to the house. Basically what I'm looking for is a nice quiet break before I go home to the kids. It's September, but this is Central Texas, so I'm still sweating balls. There's a few other people on the trail. I see a couple of guys go off-road, and out of curiosity, I go after them. I find some rugged off-road trails that go into the hills. I was excited because I didn't know that these existed. I followed the trails for some ways. I never knew these woods extended this far. It's very scenic and very untamed. There's huge rocks everywhere, animal bones, lots of foliage. I follow one particular trail until it leads to what looks like an old rocky riverbed that dried up. There's no trails here, just wilderness. I decide to go just a little bit further. It's only been about half an hour. My family can wait a little bit longer. Further up the riverbed, there's this huge cliff with an overhang. On the other side, there are these big cypress trees. Beneath the overhang is this weird, really old-looking metal wheel thing. It's kind of almost like a round table, but with moving rims that kind of fit together and turn independently. The rims have these large curved spikes that go upward, and on the rims are these patterns that line up in different ways. The spikes are rusty AF. Curiously, I go up to it, and I turn it around some, and there's kind of a quiet creak that seems to echo under the overhang. I hear this rustling at one of the cypress trees, and I shoot around. This thing is looking at me. It's humanoid, but it looks about 4.5 feet tall. It has this weird, brown, papery skin, maybe kind of like a mummy, but not exactly. The face is still intact, and has a nose and everything. The skin is papery, almost made of dead leaves or something. I see ants crawling on it. The teeth were like human teeth, but yellow and severely decayed. There were no lips to speak of, or they were bared. Its nasty teeth were showing fully. The eyes were very deep in its head, completely black, almost like they were all pupil with no whites. There was 4 really long fingers on each hand, no thumbs, just spindly fingers. I can't see any feet, but it looks like the legs seem to widen at the bottom at least. The thing moves slowly away from the cypress tree, looking right at me. It kind of rustles softly when it moves. I'm frozen. There's chills all over my body, a tightness in my chest, the nails on the chalkboard, heebie-jeebies. I'm grossed out and terrified all at the same time. And it makes this weird kind of whispery, inquisitive grunting sound, like when somebody is asking a question. The thing looks like a creepy-ass bad papier-mâché school project or something, but it's a living, breathing thing. It's hideous. I can't stand it anymore. I book it. I run so fast that I'm worried I'll trip over the rocks. The thing grunts again, louder, like it's calling after me. I wonder if it can even move away from the tree. I run for like 2.5 miles, just constant. I cut across some brush, and I get cut like hell on a bunch of thorns. I make it back to the trail and just start walking back to the car. I'm trying to let on like there's nothing happening, that nothing's going on. I take a sidewalk path behind some old buildings to cool off and get my head straight. I listen to some music to chill my nerves. I can't go home freaked out like this. I didn't sleep at all that night. I will never go back to that part of the woods again. I probably will never use that trail, not even the public part with lots of people. What the hell did I see out there? Better yet, what the hell was that wheel thing? What was that abomination by the tree? I can't even explain the fear that I had. The thing was relatively small and looked like it was made of paper, so it doesn't even sound that dangerous. I guess I felt like it was going to give me some kind of horrible disease or curse or something. Or maybe it was just so hideous I felt like this thing should not exist, let alone be alive and looking right at me. Years ago, I had an encounter with something that I'd like to get off my chest. I'm not the best writer, and I've spent some time pre-writing this to make sure that all the details are included. I'm going to forewarn you, it's really not that exciting. No one died, nothing fantastical happened, but for that, I'm kind of fortunate. So I was 24 years old at the time. I was a biologist, currently finishing up a PhD at a top Baptist university in Central Texas. I've been in state for a few years by this point. However, I originally come from up north. I've made it more than halfway through the program, and I'm finishing up my research projects in preparation to graduate with my PhD. My research focuses on mosquito-borne illnesses, and I intend to utilize my PhD and my research interests to direct commission as a medical entomologist for the Army. A lot of my research consists of field work. This includes mosquito larvae collections. As I conduct a lot of field work, I often find myself in remote places, including state and national parks. By this point, over the last few years, I have been collaborating with a former medical entomologist from the military. The reason I had this encounter was fueled by the collaboration that I have with the entomologist. During our collaborative work, I've traveled to mostly every state park in Central Texas. This is including Fort Parker, which is handily located west of Piney Woods region of Texas. The reason I mention this is that I've heard of a lot of other cryptid stories, including skinwalkers in East Texas, and Fort Parker was a few hours from Piney Woods, where I've heard of other cryptids being there. I never saw anything weird up until this point, but I believe that what I saw may have been one of those skinwalkers, due to the sheer proximity to Piney Woods and the short time it would take to get there. Now this day, I wasn't in the Piney Woods or Fort Parker. However, I had traveled to Meridian State Park. Meridian is in central eastern Texas, south of Dallas, and considered the heart of Bosque County. It was around 3 hours from Fort Parker and 4 or 5 from the Piney Woods region. I was tasked with doing some mosquito larvae surveys to see what species were present, and this had become a routine activity, so I thought nothing of it. The park was eerily deserted for a Sunday morning, with a few campsites set up and a few park rangers working. I quickly signed in at the ranger station, showed my collection credentials, and was given a parking sticker and a receipt for my car windshield. The weather was quite good, with a temperature around 74 and partially cloudy skies. I parked my car in one of the parking lots next to the lake, specifically next to Lakeside Campground Premium Shelter 4. I had counted no more than 5 cars, and from memory, I remember seeing a bunch of Taiwanese tourists. I applied bug spray. As a biologist, I've learned a lot about mosquito-borne illnesses, tick-borne illnesses, and I wouldn't be a happy camper on the receiving end of any pathogen. I grabbed my rucksack out of my trunk, as well as my collection gear, larval dipper, strainer, Eppendorf tubes, and 50 milliliter conical tubes. Now I'm usually legally carrying when I go into state parks. This is due to being from the north, originally, and having to deal with predators. Now I'm no survivalist or gun nut, and I don't have an SKS, but I do have a rusty 9mm Smith & Wesson M&P M2.0. However, on this day, I chose not to bring it because of the humidity being pretty bad. My original plan was to hike at the Bosque Trail and then cross over onto the Shinnery Ridge Trail, sampling any streams that I passed. I started out on the Civilian Conservation Corps Bridge, and I made my way north on the Bosque Trail. It was pretty amazing at first. The forest was alive with insect activity, bird calls, and a slight breeze which rustled the leaves. The Bosque Trail at this point crosses over into the smaller Little Forest Junior Trail, which is about 0.8 miles long. I stopped at Wildflower Field as it was the first time I visited the park, and I wanted to see some sights. The field was mostly dead, the wildflowers trampled, withered, and covered in weeds. I reluctantly continued along the trail, and I saw maybe one other person the quarter mile that I was on the junior trail. He asked what I was doing, and I briefly explained why I was carrying all the gear. We parted ways, and eventually I made it back on the Bosque Trail. After a while, I stopped at B Ledge, which is a rock formation overlooking Lake Meridian. It was an amazing spot, so I decided to take a picture there, which I could use for Facebook or whatever. Now, as I left the ledge, the weird things began to happen, and they continued to intensify as I went down the trail. A quarter mile from the B Ledge, I started to encounter large objects blocking the path. Several logs seemed to have been dragged on the trail. Additionally, fallen trees were spread out along the next quarter mile. Crossing over them was quite difficult, and there was quite a lot of them. This continued for several hundred feet until the trail steeply went up the side of the mountain. It seems that at some point the rangers had carved out stone stairs into the rock face. However, they were deteriorated, and at this point very hard to traverse. The trail had a long railing made from what looked like an outdoor power cord. However, due to COVID, I didn't use it. The despair continued to intensify as I made my way deeper onto the trail. At the start of the trail markers were shiny metallic rectangles with blue indicators nailed to the trees. However, they soon transitioned into just blue spray paint on the bark. Upon reaching the first stream, I crouched to unpack my ruck and started to collect larvae using the dipper. The water wasn't that deep. It wasn't flowing and had become stagnant with a deep brownish color. Using my larval dipper, I collected water and strained it for mosquito larvae. I made several collections and ultimately found several species, including a very common southern species. After taking my samples, I carefully packed my rucksack to ensure the samples wouldn't be disturbed during transit. From experience, if it's too shaky, they won't be able to float at the water's surface, and they won't breathe, and they will ultimately die. It is much easier to identify an adult mosquito versus a larvae, and I don't want to have to identify 100 dead larvae. As I continued to venture forth, the trail started to get worse and worse. It reached a point where I became pissed off and thought to myself, why the heck does it look this way? What are the rangers doing? Etc. I started to take GPS tagged pictures, which I could pass off to the rangers for trail repair operations. At this point, I doubted that any common person, let alone a weekend hiker, would be able to successfully navigate this trail, and I thought that it posed a significant safety risk. Continuing onward down the trail, I reached a dense area of woods. It seemed that out of nowhere, the trail enters a thick brush and stays in it for a long while. The thick brush had minimal undergrowth, but darkened the trail due to the thick canopy created by the overlapping trees. Now, I am a religious person. Thinking back, I should have realized that darkness ultimately relates to evil and should have been forewarned of continuing. Entering the dense woods seems to have transformed everything around me, not physically, but in a sense of how it felt different. The bird calls disappeared, the insects went silent, and the trees were not rustling anymore. Slightly alarmed, I continued onward as I was approximately an eighth of the way through the Bosque Trail and had several more streams that needed to be collected, at which could take several hours. It was 1 p.m. at this point. After a while, I felt like I was being watched. I started to get very anxious. I'm not a perfect person, but I had a really strong feeling I was being watched. I usually don't get feelings like this, so when I experience them, it's usually wise to trust them. I scanned the area and didn't see anything, so I continued onward. There was still no noise, so I increased my pace so that I could just get out of this creepy area quickly. I soon reached a second stream and decided to sample it. Like the first, the water was dark and stagnant. I unpacked my gear and quickly worked to collect samples. I found a few varied insect larvae, including several mosquito larvae and several dragonfly ones. I removed the dragonfly larvae as they kill mosquito larvae, and if I had left them, all the mosquitoes would have been dead before I returned to campus. As I was packing up, I started to smell a stagnant copper smell. Now, it's hard to explain, but the best explanation is a mixture of blood, roadkill, and death. I'm having a difficult time writing this next statement, but I'll give it my best go. As a man of science, I've learned a lot about the biology of living creatures. I've been able to extract mosquito blood meals and determine the blood meal host species using mitochondrial DNA. I've gene edited and made transgenic mosquitoes with edited receptors. I believe in a rational explanation for everything, as I've experienced a structured order to nature. At first, I freaked out a little bit internally, but I had a strong belief that some armadillo decided to die near the trail, and his decomposing corpse was responsible for the smell. Now the trail was still in a thick part of brush, so not seeing a corpse wasn't too alarming. I continued down the trail, heading toward the northern bend in the Bosque Trail. I still felt like I was being followed, but I couldn't smell the stagnant copper anymore, so I partially relaxed and looked at the map, then continued onward, southwestern down the trail. After a short while the smell returned. I was far enough from the stream that it would be very unlikely that it wafted this far. This startled and concerned me, as it isn't normal for so many corpses to be near trails, and I've never experienced something like this before. I reached a small bridge, and the thick forest started to clear out into where I could see for a short distance between the trees. I stopped for a minute to look at the map and my phone as the trail had sort of dissipated. The bridge had a small stream running underneath it, but I reluctantly still felt awkward, so I didn't sample it. While looking for where the trail continued forward, I found a large black object standing in my peripheral vision, more or so 300 feet or 100 meters away. My eyes adjusted to it, and the image focused into what looked like a person standing, 6 feet tall. However, the face was wrong, and it was covered in fur, not clothing. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, the object had disappeared. I started to internally freak out, but I soon found where the trail started back up, and the object was standing in the opposite direction when I saw it. I noped down the trail and ensured I kept my eyes scanning near where I saw the object. My biggest concern at this point was that something was following me, possibly a large animal, and I rather would not make the 6 o'clock news. While continuing down the trail, the smell lingered, and I saw it again, this time still around 300 feet to 100 meters away. And this time, I noticed it was some sort of animal. I assumed a deer standing on its back feet. I stopped to observe it, and I noticed that it was walking on 2 feet, very awkwardly, and the fur seemed to have large missing spots. I knew it wasn't human, as humans don't walk that way, nor if injured walk that way. It had a very primal and animalistic walk. I blinked at some point, and it just vanished. I got really spooked and almost started sprinting down the trail. I covered a mile of harsh terrain in about 5 minutes. I made it to a clearing where I could see across the lake and toward where I had parked. At this point, I could hear something coming from the direction I came in. It seemed to be slowly getting louder. And then I hear it. "Bill, where'd go? Bill, go you." My mind pieced together that it was saying, "Bill, where'd you go?" I have no clue who Bill is, and the voice didn't sound human. It's as if an animal voice box was being forced to pronounce human words. It sounded raspy and primal. This absolutely scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I kept a steady pace down the trail. I kept scanning my surroundings and cursing at myself for not bringing my pistol. The smell intensified, and I'm pretty sure it was following me closely. I made due diligence to ensure that I wasn't being outmaneuvered or flanked. Whatever it was hunting me, and I had 70 pounds of gear on me, and I was ultimately a slow-moving target. I eventually made it to the eastern campsites, marked with a picnic bench on the map, and I felt a sigh of relief. I'm not sure if these things can hunt in open terrain, but I would have a good view of it if it left the tree line. To my surprise, there was an older, middle-aged lady camped there. She had a dog with her, and the dog was going absolutely nuts, barking. At first, I thought that I spooked the dog, but after looking at it for a while, it was barking at something in the tree line, not at me. After a while, it whimpered and ran away from the tree line and toward the lady's tent, and she called its name. Let's say Fido, because I don't remember what it was. I socially distanced a hello wave, and I continued to awkwardly run down the trail, carrying my gear. It was quite peaceful and quiet for a short distance down the trail, and eventually I reached a road. I felt guilty about how that lady was probably going to get eaten by whatever this was, but I felt fortunate that I escaped. About 30 minutes later, I stumbled out on a Forest Service road. The trail seemed to wind up onto the road and just abruptly ended. Now for my recollection, this is the road on the southwestern corner of the map, which parallels the trail. The smell came back again, and I started to panic. I heard, "Where'd Fido?" which really freaked me out because whatever it was saying was mirroring the lady. Now the trail didn't have a good indicator of where it started back up. I was freaking out as the noise was increasing. I started to head, I presume, north on the road, and eventually figured out that it was the wrong way, as it didn't follow the contour of the road on the map. I double-time it back and see a park ranger driving down the road toward me. I flag him down, and I ask him where the Bosque Trail starts back up. To my surprise, the trail actually backs onto the road, where you have to walk down the road following a spray-painted dots, and eventually it goes back into the woods. I'm sure the ranger knew something was up because he was very brief and told me to stay on the trails. I asked him about if there were any predators in the woods that which I should worry about. His eyes got real big, and he told me again not to deviate, stay on the trails, and to probably just go home and call it a day. He took off speeding down the road. I awkwardly sprinted south down the road, and eventually found the trail again. The whole time, in the distance, I heard, "Where trailback? Start." This thing was mocking me, stalking me, while I talked to the ranger. I hauled my ass down the trail and eventually reached a clearing. This clearing being the southern bend of the trail, where it curves off east into a straight line. The area was quite open. It almost reminded me of a rice field, as there were swamps on either side of the trail, and it was elevated on a grass mound about 8 feet up, 10 feet wide, I continued in a sprint across the mound, and I reached the end of the trail where it loops to my car. When I reached the bend which led toward where I parked, I stopped and looked back. It was standing on the mound near the forest opening, 200 feet away, just staring at me. It wasn't on the two legs anymore, however on all fours. The face looked honestly like the descriptions that I've seen on the internet. It was sunken, red dots and black eyes. It also seemed to be smirking at me. I booked it to my car, threw my ruck in the trunk, and I literally did not stop until I reached campus. I'm not sure if all this is real though. I packed a good meal. I had lots of water. I wasn't dehydrated. I'm in good mental health, or as best you can be in a PhD program. It wasn't a deer, a bear, or anything I've ever seen before. Since then, I've not wanted to go in the woods or collecting any samples without another person with me. I'm sorry this may have been uneventful and not super fantastical, but I really wanted to get it off my chest. So those encounters were insane, weren't they? If one of them stuck out to you, let me know which one it was. Otherwise, I thank you for watching the video. If you would like to donate to the channel, there's links in the description below. If you want to send your own story into the channel, there's also an email down there as well. Other than that, I ask you to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And if you want to, you can watch another video. I'll put a couple on the screen right here. And with that, I thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and I thank you for watching. Have a good week.